This is Committable. I'm Jesse Mangan, and for this episode, we are talking about a recent report from Disability Rights California about excessive use of restraint in a private facility in California. And I'm very lucky to have with me here Robert Reyes Villagómez. Do you want to introduce yourself? Say whatever you want about who you are and the type of work you do.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Jesse. So my name is Robert Reyes Villagómez. I am a non-binary Chicano person. I work as an investigator with Disability Rights California. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. And we also have Liz Logsdon. Liz, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name's Liz Logsdon. My pronouns are she, her. I am the managing attorney of the investigations unit at Disability Rights California.
I think before we really get into the report, one of the things that's important to understand is the monitoring and investigation authority that a protection and advocacy organization has. So, could you talk a little bit, just very briefly, about what a P&A organization is and what that monitoring and investigation authority entails?
Absolutely. So the protection and advocacy system was created by federal statute in the 1970s, starting with an act specifically to protect people with developmental disabilities. And there have been more acts added over the years to make sure that we're able to serve other populations. There is a protection and advocacy agency in every state and also every US territory. And there's one in the Four Corners area that serves Native populations. In California, Disability Rights California is a nonprofit organization designated as the state's protection and advocacy agency. And one of the things that is unique to the P&A system is our access authority. So we have authority granted to us by federal statute, and in California, it's also codified in state law that makes us different from all other legal and disability nonprofits and advocacy groups. It's really our superpower, this access authority. We have the authority to monitor facilities for abuse, neglect, rights violations, even if we don't have any complaints about abuse or neglect. So that authority is granted to us specifically by law. We are able to have physical access to facilities, including any spaces in the facility that residents would have access to. So if a person who lives there is allowed to enter that space, then people who work for the protection and advocacy system are allowed to enter that space. We also have the ability to have unaccompanied interviews with any resident or person receiving care or services there. So it's very important, and it really lets us do truly incredible work. And then we have other kinds of authority when someone actually makes a complaint about abuse or neglect to us, or when we determine that we have what's called probable cause that abuse or neglect is occurring. That's when we start getting access to stuff. So that would mean that we would be conducting an investigation into an allegation of abuse or neglect, and we would start being able to access people's individual records, facility policies, records from investigative agencies or licensing entities, photos, videos. If it exists, we can likely access it. We're also allowed to take authorized agents on visits with us. So as we get into talking about this report that we did into College Hospital, we'll share with you about how we had board certified behavior analysts as experts that became our authorized agents. And we're also able to use our access authority the same way that we were. So they were able to come to the facility with us. They were able to review records, individual records and things like that. They were able to interview residents at this particular hospital. There are confidentiality limits to what we can disclose using that access authority, and this is also codified in federal and in California state statute. We are authorized by statute to make public reports about our findings, but we have to keep the identities of individual service recipients confidential. So that's why when you look at reports that we produce, you'll see that we're using pseudonyms for all of the different patients at College Hospital. For instance, there's a surveillance video that's part of our report that you can view, and we have blurred all of the faces, including the faces of staff.
So, with this investigation into College Hospital, was that started by a specific complaint or was that started through some other means?
And so that's a really great question. And so each state's protection and advocacy agency is going to learn about complaints of abuse and neglect in different ways. In California, there are a few state statutes that would not necessarily apply to other protection and advocacy agencies or P&As in other states, where their certain facilities are required by law to notify us about certain types of incidents or provide us with certain types of data. So in the case of College Hospital, there is in California, we have something called the Regional Center System, which is a service delivery model for people with developmental disabilities. I will not get into the details of what the Regional Center System is and how it works because we could talk all day about that. But what I will tell you is that there is a state law that says that regional center vendors in certain categories that provide residential type of services are supposed to report to DRC, Disability Rights California, every month about the use of restraint and seclusion in the facility. So we're supposed to receive reports from them that tell us how many incidents of restraint, how many incidents of seclusion, how many applications of chemical restraint, and the duration of all of those different restraints. So we receive that data reporting from facilities all over the state. And that is one of the things that triggered our investigation into College Hospital is that the numbers that we were receiving in that data were very, very high, both in terms of the number of times people were restrained and in terms of the duration of the restraint that people were experiencing. So that's one of the big factors in us conducting our investigation. We've looked at College Hospital a number of times over the years, and then I'll back up in a moment and tell you a little bit more about what College Hospital is. But we've done, checked on people who had been subject to long restraints, or if we had occasionally we receive phone calls to our 1-800 number, to our intake number, where people want to complain about something that they're experiencing that's harmful. And so we've done a number of individual investigations on behalf of a single person at College Hospital over the years. But the pattern that we were seeing was this trend of just a very high use of restraint and seclusion that we found very alarming. And when we would check with people's individual cases, individual instances of being restrained and secluded, we were finding things that we found troubling. And so we decided to expand the investigation and make it more systemic into looking at lots of different people at College Hospital, visiting the facility many times, walking around, speaking to people, both that we had previously identified as having been subject to restraint and seclusion, and also just speaking to people that we met while walking the halls at the facility, that type of thing. So that's how it grew from sort of a series of smaller one-off, I guess you could say, investigations into particular harms to looking at the whole facility and all of their practices.
So College Hospital is a private facility that
Yes.
has a little under 200 beds, I think, for people with developmental disabilities or people diagnosed with some sort of mental illness. And so, am I correct that in California you have the LPS Act, so you have the 5150, 5152, all that, and so people being brought into that system could be transferred maybe from an emergency department somewhere like that to College Hospital. Is that kind of how the process works?
Yes, that's correct. So College Hospital is a private for-profit psychiatric hospital. It's licensed by our California Department of Public Health as an acute psychiatric facility. That's a specific licensure category that has its own set of regulations that apply to it. College Hospital actually operates more than one facility. So when I say College Hospital, and we're talking about it in the context of this report, I'm talking specifically about College Hospital in Cerritos. And then I'm talking even more specifically about what they call their DDMI units. That's an acronym for Developmental Disability Mental Illness Unit. So what you would also hear referred to as dual diagnosis. So people who have a diagnosis of both a developmental disability and a mental illness. That is what we were looking at specifically. So this is a locked facility. People do not have the ability to leave. The bed count there is approximately 180, and they have both adults and youth at College Hospital.
This sounds like a very specific sort of population that they should be servicing. So they should have a very specialized sort of process for helping people who may have really complex needs. But when we're talking about restraints, you mentioned chemical restraints and then other types of restraints. Can we just very briefly go over what type of restraints we're talking about? What do we mean when we talk about restraints in relation to this report?
Tell you a more practical, what does that actually look like type of definition. So you will hear a difference between physical restraint and chemical restraint. So physical restraint is anytime you're applying some sort of force to the body to prevent movement. And so you can have restraints that are actually people being held down by another person. And then you can also have restraints that are maybe what you're picturing when I say restraint, which would be where you are strapped down to like a gurney, essentially. And so when we say the term 5 point restraints, that would mean that you would have restraints on each, one restraint on each wrist, so that's 2 points, one restraint on each ankle, so that's another 2 points. That's adds up to four. And then we have the fifth point would be some sort of strap across the torso. And so that would be what we would call a 5 point restraint. That would mean that the person was attached to a bed with, they're typically leather straps, and the movement is, pretty much completely restricted when you're experiencing 5 point restraints. And then chemical restraint is any time that someone is given a medication that is meant to control their behavior or restrict their movement. That would not be part of their typical sort of treatment plan that they would regularly receive. And then we haven't talked yet about seclusion, which it would be when someone is placed in a room that they can't leave, but they're not necessarily, have their movement restricted. They may be able to move freely within the seclusion room, but they can't leave the seclusion room.
So this specific investigation starts by just some routine monitoring. It sounds like you are routinely being given reports on the number of restraints, and this facility is exceptionally high, it sounds like, or at least that's what the report suggested, that the number of restraints was exponentially more than the average facility, it seemed like.
Yes.
So then what happens once you look at those numbers? Then what do you do?
Well, we start walking around and talking to everyone that we can. And I feel like I've been talking for quite a while, so I'd like to let Robert tell you about what some of that actual, you know, boots on the ground type of work looks like.
Sure. So, about the data and college being overrepresented in restraint usage, I pulled some data from the California Department of Developmental Services, which collects that restraint data that Liz mentions. They have it publicly accessible as well, so anyone can go onto their website and pull different reports that break out restraint and seclusion numbers through all the different vendors that are submitting data to this department. And college from the period of January 1st, 2024 to June 1st, 2024, college constituted a little bit over 25% of the entire state's like incidence of restraint and seclusion, which is, as what Liz mentioned, is just one unit in one hospital, comprising a quarter of our enormous state's, incidence of seclusion and restraint over this 6 month period. And that's just a snapshot of I guess the practice in college hospital. So to go in, we also our team worked with administrators at the hospital. So we frequently engaged with the administrators that are running the programs, interviewing staff as well. And we'd often start visits by touring the facility, walking through the different housing units as well as the recreation yards, and meeting people to talk about their experiences. We would pull information about like we would generate a list of people to interview. And our criteria was anyone who's been restrained for over 2 hours that we would want to at least make an introduction and talk with them and sit with them. And most people were very, happy to speak with us. And I will say that I've interviewed a number of the patients there, and you can really tell, I think, how this setting impacts a person's kind of like presence, because we would interview people that are recently admitted to College Hospital, and they'd be very frank, very upfront and open about their experiences, and kind of had that energy of being like, this is really messed up. What's happening here? I've never been restrained so much. To months into their stay, just being more and more withdrawn because of this frequent and lengthy restraint. We would meet people over multiple times over the course of our investigation, partially because they're consistently restrained for that length of time, more than 2 hours. But we would also just, in the nature of just going to, hang out in the day room. And I say hang out like, it's maybe a little too casual for what we were doing. But we would go and spend time, in the day room to speak to those individuals, but also we'd make ourselves available to anyone who wants to speak with us. So I did speak with another person who had concerns about the side effects to their medication. And I was like, okay, well, if you're interested, we can take a look at your records and see, if this medication use is excessive. And I saw that while this person was not being restrained for 2 hours, they're still being restrained pretty frequently for shorter durations, 30 minutes to an hour, which still has a strong impact on a person, just because you are involuntarily being injected with a chemical medication and subsequently restrained and tied to a bed. So yeah, it is a soul crushing environment, I would say. And one of our recommendations too really looks at the therapeutic environment at college, not just the physical setting, but the programming that's also available to people. And there's a lot of area to improve on what's, enriching programming that can help people kind of, I guess, like stabilize and ideally leave college. But yeah, I'll leave it there, I guess, for now.
Yeah, I think that's something that is not really talked about enough in the general public, which is facilities like this generally aren't rehabilitation. They're not really making someone better. And when you talk about something like a developmental disability or some conditions, there's no cure because it's often a diagnosis given off of subjective symptoms. And so there's no cure for the symptoms being identified. So it's stabilization. That's the primary focus of a lot of these places when you're talking about a mental health law has been enacted. It's stabilization. And if the purpose is, I guess, stabilization, you want to create an environment that is as safe as possible, as comfortable as possible, because often at least in my experience, in these situations, that's what someone needs is somewhere safe, maybe quiet, comfortable, just to process whatever distress is happening. And so when you talk about the maybe the improvements that could be made to the therapeutic or the programs being offered, what sort of recommendations are you giving to the facility?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think a trend that we noticed was that the setting was becoming more and more jail-like, at least in our opinion. I'm thinking, and this isn't necessarily in the report, it's more like, my own observations and conversations we had as a team. But one example is the kind of the outdoor patio space that's available for patients to kind of go out, get some fresh air. We really only saw people kind of, playing basketball very loosely, just shooting hoops. But one example is that over the course of the 2 years, a little bit more than 2 years that we did the investigation, that there are some changes being done to that patio. One of them was the removal of like the lawn, so like actual grass that's growing, and replacing it with astroturf, which is hotter and not as pleasant, at least in my opinion, to spend time on compared to real grass. Another was the replacement of the kind of the fencing that surrounds that yard from kind of like a metal fence that you can see through. And there are some bushes that flower, the bougainvillea bushes, which had some really beautiful blooms when we would go and see. The administration there replaced those fences with just tall concrete walls with barbed wire like at the top, which makes you feel even more enclosed and confined in there because you can't even see outside. So that's environmental stuff. We had one visit, and one of our authorities too is to be able to make unannounced visits and gain entry. We would often announce our visits so we can meet with staff, tour the facility, connect, and that way we can also facilitate interviews more easily because they know, right, that we're going to come, we want to talk with these people and arrange it. But one of the days we started noticing that whenever we go, people are just sitting around, and there is a schedule on the wall that has different groups and programs, a variety throughout the day posted on the wall. But yeah, every time we went, we would see people just in a day room watching a movie. There's no interaction between staff or other patients. That's kind of a constructive, like intentional therapeutic programming. Or, people are just shooting hoops kind of easily. So on that day, we came and we did a unannounced visit just to look at their programming. They made us wait for 20 minutes or so as before we entered. And then when we went in, we split into like three groups to go to the three different wings within the unit. And I bore witness to a in the youth wing for minors, just a really rushed kind of patient's rights. I don't even know how to describe it. Not a training. It was kind of like there was a nurse who was leading a discussion and be like, "Hey guys, what are some of the rights you have?" And it was a very like poorly facilitated, less than 15 minutes of this. I don't even know what to call it. Um, yeah,
Yeah, I think it's easy for people being trained and working in these facilities to forget or not fully grasp that the rules are there for a good reason. They're there for uh, not only protecting rights, and I know that there are some pro-commitment advocates who think that people go too far with protecting rights, but the rights are there to protect dignity, and the dignity and the humanity are the important thing. So the rights represent that, and that's the thing that needs to be focused on. So, have you talked to anyone who described possibly the long-term impacts of this sort of restraint? Because that can sound pretty casual, it can sound 30 minutes. I think a lot of people who hear this type of report might think, I could sit 30 minutes in a chair. That'd be fine. But did you talk to anyone who described long-term impacts after experiences like this?
I'm not really think I have a kind of well, I'll share what I have on my mind. The one person that I spoke with, that really I could see the visual impact and kind of trauma that has been with them since I've been in college because they had lived at college at this point for more than 6 years, which is way longer than someone should be staying at an acute psychiatric hospital inpatient. So that person, whenever we would speak with them, and people have different, levels of speaking verbally. This person, he could speak in, shorter sentences and was able to communicate like, more or less effectively with us, verbally. And, we would normally develop rapport, talk about how's your day going, like, talk about other things and then slowly ease into, talking about restraint and seclusion. So originally we were talking about Pokemon cards with this individual because that was one of his interests. And we're having a pretty, nice conversation leading into this. And then as soon as I asked the question, kind of like, so, have you experienced any restraint recently? His demeanor immediately switched and he started, rocking in his chair for the kind of like, reasonable sentences really shortened to 1 to 2 words, just saying like, I don't want restraint, just rocking in his chair and repeating that. And we didn't push any further just because, we could see the heavy emotional impact that it was having on that person at the time. So we stayed there. And that wasn't the first time we had met with this person. We had met with him over the course of our 2 year investigation. I think there's other folks probably on our team that can speak more so to like maybe someone else's like experience with saying like this is how this impacted me. But I think I'll just reiterate that person's like kind of traumatic experience saying I don't want restraint, rocking in his chair, just kind of with the TD, I think, like handshaking and stuff like that. And then also with that just general kind of emotional, I guess, just retreating into yourself because you're not in control in this setting. And from reviewing case records, I saw incidents where someone maybe threw some juice, across the cafeteria, juice in a cup, didn't hit anybody, but they were restrained for a few hours after that, which is not appropriate usage of restraint because this isn't an action that put anyone in danger, neither the person or another patient. It's just tossing juice.
When you're talking about an acute facility and someone being kept in an acute, specifically licensed for acute detention facility, what are the guidelines around that for someone being kept in an acute facility for 6 years? I guess I would just, I'm wondering, is that within the regulation? Because I don't know. I'm imagining acute facility. The goal should be stabilize and find some sort of community placement. So Is that unusual to have someone detained in a facility like that for 6 years?
It's not unheard of, but it is unusual. And I think one of the things that we saw happening specifically at College Hospital is that they are not providing adequate transition planning for the people who stay there. So there's multiple players, I guess you could say, that are involved in, where someone who, for instance, receives regional center services, so has, a right to certain services. Not everyone who lives at College Hospital is a regional center, receives regional center services, but many of them are. And there are things that, regional center is supposed to do to make sure that people have places to live, but there are also things that College Hospital is supposed to do to make sure that people are getting ready for discharge. There would be people that when we review their records, we would see that it would say in their records that they were ready for discharge, and then they would continue to be at the facility for an extended period of time after that. And part of that would be because there would not be placements that would accept them. And we think that these things are related. So we think that part of what is happening here is because of the environment at College Hospital, and which we've already described as not a therapeutic environment, that is not a trauma-informed environment, and the application of restraints in ways that we do not think are appropriate cause people to have more behaviors rather than be more stabilized, right? And then continue to have restraints applied to them. And so when people are looking for discharge, they are preparing packets about the individual and sending them to potential placements, right? And so now the packet says this person has all of these behaviors and they get restrained this frequently. And then the place that receives the packet says, well, I can't handle that level of behavior here at our facility. And so we think that these things are all tied into each other, and that, you know, in a way, College Hospital is the reason why people can't leave College Hospital, because of the environment and because of the inappropriate preparation of behavior plans and the excessive use of restraint and seclusion. And it creates a situation for a person where they're having more restraint continuously applied, and it makes them, I don't, it makes them less, like, quote, appealing to potential community-based placements. And we do think there are obviously a lot of things that they could do differently to improve that.
I believe there was something in the report, someone witnessed a prone restraint or some other form of restraint. What is that? Is that usual? Is that allowed? What is a prone restraint?
So a prone restraint is when someone is restrained in a face down position. So your face is towards the ground, your torso is facing or on the ground. And generally speaking, some sort of pressure is being applied to, like, your back or the backs of your arms or something to keep you in that position. So, Robert, did you interview that person?
I did not. That was the our consultant experts that spoke and got that information.
Something I think is really important about all of this is an acute facility. Obviously, that doesn't necessarily mean people are there for a short period of time, but I also think the length of time can be distracting in a conversation like this because if you are restrained or detained, when you're in a facility like this, you're not free to leave. You're detained. Even if the facility did have a nice yard, it would still be a detention, and that's a real sort of assault on dignity, on humanity for a person, particularly a person who doesn't understand why they're there, which is often, at least in my experience, this process. It is a moment in time. Someone has experienced distress. Usually there is some sort of distress. It is a moment in time, someone possibly in a really bad day, a really bad moment, and they're brought to a facility like this. And I want anyone listening who hasn't been through this to imagine on your worst day being in some sort of emergency department or interacting with a clinician who says, I don't know what to do. We're going to send you here. We're going to 5150 you, which theoretically is 72 hours, but can go on to 14 days and then months, if not years. And imagine being in that moment and arriving at this facility where you're told you can't leave, and then possibly multiple people holding you face down. Imagine that experience, and then imagine being told the state is doing this to help you. And I think that's the conflict, that's the schism that to me, it's hard to grasp because it's not necessarily about the length. It's not necessarily about what the diagnosis is. It's that conflict between a state saying this is for your own good and you having some part of your body, the autonomy taken away from you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's completely traumatizing, and the prone restraint in particular is inherently dangerous. We've done reports, Disability Rights California has done reports about this in the past. It can be lethal if there's too much pressure. People can asphyxiate, people can not have the ability to breathe, but it's not illegal. So state regulations about acute psychiatric hospitals specifically say that they should avoid the deliberate use of prone containment techniques whenever possible. So that's what it says in regulation, but it doesn't say that you cannot apply them. I think lawmakers have been hesitant to completely ban certain types of restraint techniques. I think we've seen that in a variety of different investigations that we've done. And, there have been other areas that we were, have called for certain practices to be banned. And I think that we've seen a hesitancy to remove, take options completely off the table. But it's been DRC's long-standing position that prone restraint in particular is incredibly dangerous and it shouldn't ever be used.
Do you know, or do you have a sense of what the hesitancy around removing prone restraints would be?
I don't want to speculate, so
Sure. Uh,
I can share something.
please.
I think, well, if you ask college hospital administrators as well, like they will often just paint, like they'll give you the spiel that they serve a very unique and like disturbed, I'm using air quotes, disturbed population that is really, justifies all the frequency of restraints, the different interventions that they use, the kind of like chemical cocktails that they inject people with. And I've heard it, we've heard it multiple times going there. And, I'm like, okay, wow. And then I talk to like 15 people and meet with 15 people. And, you know, um, I've never felt in danger for speaking to people there. I treat people with respect and, obviously people have their different abilities when it comes to communication, but it's really just being present with the individuals and I can imagine in their role going in, being in really a culture of this kind of like positive feedback loop. You go in, say you had a negative experience, and then other staff had negative experiences, and it just kind of like rotates. Especially if like leadership is saying that these folks are just uniquely dangerous or could deserve, I guess, this treatment. And I'll say too, when reviewing the incident reports, so every time someone's placed into seclusion and restraint, staff need to fill out an incident report as well as kind of a seclusion and restraint just document, I guess, that says why did this person enter? Why was this ordered, basically? Did you debrief with the person to like kind of explain like why they were entered into restraints? And that's supposed to help reduce seclusion and restraints because by having that debrief, you're able to bring in some behavioral like a behavioral assessment as to like what was the negative behavior that they're trying to correct essentially, and so they can stabilize and be released. That wasn't happening. A lot of the people that I interviewed were just like, I don't know why I was restrained. It all of a sudden it just happened. We had these 7 people kind of like hold me down and then strap me to a bed, and I'm not sure what to do differently next time. And the behavioral assessment and the behavioral improvement planning, BIP, that's the acronym. I probably messed up what the actual acronym means, but a lot of those are very boilerplate. Like it's just not done correctly, nor is it thorough or specific to each individual. It would say something like, "We want to reduce aggression," or like it was just very 3 words. How do you measure that? It's yeah, they I don't believe that they're able to. And that was also the opinion of our consultant, BC board certified behavioral analyst, was just that they need to totally like relearn and retrain and move towards a function based assessment model where they look at a behavior and like how it expresses itself and then develop a plan to kind of address that.
Is anyone working in the facility authorized to do this, or are there specific categories of people who can initiate a restraint?
So restraints need to be ordered by a physician.
Okay.
Practically, though, like I think a nurse,
Right. So I'm gonna let you speak, Robert. Yeah.
yeah, it's also legal as well. So I might mess this up, but a nurse or another staff person can also initiate a restraint. And after they do that, they have to get a doctor's order within a certain time period. I think it might be, is it within an hour or maybe 30 minutes? I forget. It's within a time period. Because it might be, restraints are really supposed to be a last resort intervention in an emergency situation when someone's a danger to others or themselves that a restraint's supposed to be used. So often a doctor might not be present, but they do have to call in. And like ideally, they call in the nurses or whatever staff orders this, calls in and gets the doctor's order. We did file a complaint with the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, who did a subsequent investigation and found, different instances, multiple instances where doctors' orders were not they did not receive them for like restraint and seclusion incidents, which is a big issue. And they did have a violation from CMS about that and had to submit a plan of correction for that issue, as well as issues with like patients' rights violations, not providing like informed consent. So College Hospital was not informing family members that their loved ones in college were getting restrained, and a multitude of other issues.
I know that this problem happens in other places too, similar problems. There was a facility in Massachusetts, where I'm originally from, where there was a similar concern where people were being restrained, and it's a similar thing. You can be restrained for up to 2 hours before you need that visit, and people were consistently every time being restrained for 120 minutes. And so you look at the facility or you look at data like that, and it's like, how could it be necessary to hold someone for the maximum amount of time every single time? And so it speaks to like clinical practice to culture, clinical culture maybe that they're being trained in a certain way, that people are coming into that job thinking this is the way it's done. This is what the best practice is. Do you have a way of really speaking to that practice? Can you recommend that they change their practices? What do you do with next steps once you see something like that? Like clearly there are some really concerning practices here. As the Protection Advocacy organization, what are your next steps?
So our recommendation always is that restraint shouldn't be used. That's always at the core of our recommendation as the PNA, as Disability Rights California, is that we should be moving towards not restraining people at all as much as humanly possible. I think that there are a lot of practices we look at, like you were just describing, that are technically within the bounds of the law, right? And I don't always know that tightening up those regulations and having increased statutory protections. I mean, they are that's helpful in some ways, but in other ways, we're not getting at the root of what's really happening here. So, this is multimodal advocacy. That's what we do. So we have this report that we've written where all of the recommendations are directed at College Hospital, right? And then we also took a more sort of traditional legal, if you will, pathway and filed that complaint with CMS, who is responsible for the facility's ability to get funding to have people live there, and he said they are violating these regulations. Even though the regulations could potentially be stronger or more protective, they are violating them. So you should come in and take a look, which they did, right? And then they did issue, they put the facility actually on a track to not be able to receive those dollars anymore until they had a plan of correction. They did the plan of correction, and then they went out and did a re-review and determined that they were in compliance with it. So that's how that happened. But then the other things that we're doing are we're talking to you right now. We've had some virtual events where we have been really working on making sure that what we've found in this report is making its way to the community, because that's where power truly lies, is in the community. And we want to build that power in community. And I think that if the walls of facilities like this were glass and you could see what was happening in them, and you could see when you walked down the street what was happening to your neighbor, that people would find it unacceptable. But they're not. The walls are stone and they're tall and they have razor wire, like Robert described earlier. We have some photos in our report because our access authority gives us the ability to take photos. So if you were to look at the report on our website, you can see those walls that we're describing. And we're having some in-person events coming up soon where we're, talking to community members about our findings. We're going to have one in English and one in Spanish next month. Not at the hospital, of course, but in that surrounding community. But also people come to this facility from all over the state. So, we are really trying to hear, not just come up with our own ideas for what could be different, but really hear from community about what their needs are and what ideas they have for a different vision. We're meeting with state agencies about this and our findings, and we're asking them what they're planning to do. Those meetings are collegial. So we're trying to sort of look at all of the different levers that we may have to affect this change, right? But one of the big things that I think we always try to do in the investigations unit in particular is try to take the stone walls in places like College Hospital and make them glass so that people can see what's happening to their community members, what's happening to their neighbors, what's happening to their loved ones inside places like this.
With all of the recent expansions and attempts to continue to expand mental health laws in California, I think I would encourage people to think about this process and where someone can end up when they are funneled into this process, and to really think about why protection and advocacy organizations are necessary, because we talk about deinstitutionalization, or we talk about how bad things were 60, 70 years ago, but from everything you're describing, if you weren't receiving reports, if you weren't able to go in and monitor, it seems very likely this sort of thing would be happening possibly more. And so I encourage everyone to think about the necessity of a watchdog organization like this, and to think about, if you are interested in expanding mental health laws, first imagine if it was you that was being forced into that system. Is that what you would want? Is that what you would find helpful?
And like on that point too, I think we also want to see just more services, more resources for people to prevent, mental health crises. Because once you're at the point where you are getting 5150, College Hospital is, we've looked, it is like the only hospital that has a program that is dedicated to people who are duly diagnosed with a developmental disability and mental illness in the state. So they do have an effective monopoly over treatment, and that makes it even more difficult to kind of say, hey, look, the market is gonna offer an alternative because people are having horrible experiences here. And you can even just go on Yelp and look at College Hospital, and you'll see hundreds of reviews that say, I hate it here, basically. And that's the other part as well. It's just getting to the finances and the fact that, regional centers, a majority of the patients we spoke to are regional center clients or consumers. Medicare, Medicaid's also funding the hospital. So they are, in a financial sense, being rewarded for having this program. And it doesn't matter what the actual health outcome is for the patient, which I think kind of speaks to the issues that come with for-profit healthcare. It's just that it's more focused on at least not patient care, just getting people in and out. And honestly, I guess with college, they still bear to profit, when they keep someone for 7 years or more. Yeah.
And I think another thing I'd like to point out to your listeners, if you are thinking that, I mean, probably anyone who's listening to this is on, the side of deinstitutionalization, but even if you're not a person who thinks that you might someday find yourself in this situation, right? That you think that this is never going to happen to me. Well, your tax dollars are what pay for it. So your tax dollars are what pay for Medicare, Medicaid, regional center to put people in this place and pay this for-profit place and allow people to be strapped to beds, unable to move for hours, forced to just look upwards into the styrofoam drop ceiling and fluorescent light and wait to be released and spend your outdoor time on the concrete patio with the stone wall and the razor wire and we're all a part of this. So it should matter to everyone.
Yeah, the first time I was involuntarily hospitalized was many years ago. I was a teenager, and a psychologist had me strapped into a gurney because, in the psychologist's perspective, I later heard him describe it in court. So I actually got to hear him describe his process. That's just how you do it. When someone needs a ride to the hospital, you strap them down. And I mean, the last facility I was in, you had to earn being able to go outside. You had to be good in order. So when you talk to people who have come out of a facility or have been in there for months and they aren't screaming, I hate it here, it's often because the people who have the power over your autonomy have the authority to take that away if they want to. And I didn't really think about when I got out of my last hospitalization, my goal was to avoid the system at all costs. Don't be detected. That I don't understand it. I don't understand what's happening. Just don't be detected. I didn't really think much of it until I was finishing a degree in movement science. And one of my instructors, I don't know, they must have spotted something because they said, I just want to try something. And they simply put their hands on my shoulders and said, don't move. Just for a few minutes, don't move. And I started panicking. Having someone put their hands, just a person I trusted, putting their hands on my shoulders and remembering that feeling, I was back there in an instant. I just started panicking in front of an entire class. I just started crying and I couldn't understand why. And that's the impact of a really routine restraint. It can stay with you. That feeling's in your body. It's in your mind. That trauma stays with you. So I want to thank you both for doing this work and for talking about this report. I encourage everyone to look at it. I encourage everyone to talk more about what they want and what they think should be happening, what they think humanity and dignity look like when people are put to this process. And as we wrap up the interview, is there anything else that you want to say about the report? Anything I haven't mentioned?
I mean, I appreciate you for sharing your experience as well. It made me think of a one of the youth that I didn't interview, but I reviewed this person's records. I was able to request, or I requested their school records, and so I reviewed basically from like first grade up until you know 10th or 11th grade where they're at once they were hospitalized at college, and I could just see, the different infractions that the student was receiving from teachers. And, I could see like how, because the school system was not able to accommodate this person fully, that, their infractions were getting more and more serious to a point where he was sent to a juvenile hall for like a day because he was wearing like a costume like at school and it wasn't Halloween or whatever. And he didn't want to take off the costume. And I just felt, your story also made me just reflect about how, like, I think disability is most of the time a policy choice to not have, say, like, elevator access to like subways or something. That's, that disables people because they're not afforded the opportunity to use public transit or to be independent. And I think that's another piece that, institutions like college, like I would love to, see some kind of study or further investigation is like, how do these institutions further disable people just because of the trauma and the difficulties that someone faces in a setting where they're supposed to be, you know, healing or getting stable or what have you. So yeah, I think we got it pretty flipped in many in school and healthcare and housing. So we got a lot to work on as a society.
Yeah, and changing a law, very, very hard, very complicated. But I think that cultural component, as you're talking about, when we view providing mobility aid access as an exceptional thing. We impart the message that there are certain type of people that are supposed to be interacting with society. When you tell someone wearing a costume is a sign of your disability or is inappropriate and we will punish you for it, you're telling them certain type of people belong in this society. So I think I can't change the laws. It's very, very hard, but we can try and work on culture in society. We can, as a society, be more accepting and acknowledging of humanity comes in all sorts of different shapes, sizes, types, personalities, and we can be accepting of all of those. Yeah, so thank you both for doing the interview and thank you for doing the work you're doing.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
And, I do think radical transformation is possible and that we should be continuously working toward it all the time. But until there are no more college hospitals, we will be here.